German Shepherd barked nonstop until a bear arrived. A crying infant made them unite to save her. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Every bit of your support helps us create even more amazing stories for you. The morning mist hung low over the remote cabin nestled between ancient pines. Sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows across the wooden porch where Atlas, a vigilant German shepherd with deep chestnut eyes, sat alert. His ears twitched at every sound, his powerful senses detecting something in the forest that human ears could not perceive. Inside the cabin, 3-month-old Lily slept peacefully in her wooden cradle, her tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. Wren and Silas Morgan had moved to this secluded mountain retreat, hoping to escape the chaos of city life after Lily's birth. The pristine wilderness offered solace and a fresh start for the young family. That morning, they had stepped out briefly to collect firewood from the nearby shed, leaving Atlas to watch over their sleeping daughter, as he had done faithfully since they'd brought her home. The first bark pierced the silence like a gunshot. Atlas stood rigid, his gaze fixed on the dense tree line 50 yards from the cabin. He barked again, the sound more urgent this time. Inside, Lily stirred but didn't wake. Atlas paced nervously, whining between sharp barks that grew increasingly frantic. His claws clicked against the wooden boards as he moved between the forest's edge and the cabin's front door, trying desperately to communicate a warning no one understood. When Lily finally woke, her cries joined Atlas's barks in an unsettling duet. Atlas paused, ears perked toward the cabin, before rushing to the window nearest her cradle. He scratched at the glass, whimpering as Lily's cries intensified. Something wasn't right. The air felt heavy with danger, an invisible threat lurking just beyond human perception. In the forest, yellow eyes watched. A mountain cougar, lean and deadly, had been stalking the property for days. Hungry and territorial, it had smelled the infant, helpless prey, and the opportunity was too tempting to resist. The predator slunk through the underbrush, calculating each step as it moved closer to the cabin. Atlas sensed its approach, and his barking became desperate, a continuous alarm that echoed through the trees. Wren and Silas remained oblivious, the woodshed just far enough away that Atlas's warnings were muffled by distance and dense forest. They worked methodically, stacking logs for the coming cold night, unaware that their world was about to change forever. Atlas made a decision. He couldn't reach Lily inside, and her cries were growing weaker. Something primal in him knew time was running short. With a final glance at the cabin, he bounded toward the forest, barking with renewed vigor. If he couldn't protect Lily from inside, he would confront the threat directly. He charged toward the scent of the cougar, his body trembling with each powerful stride. The cougar paused, startled by this direct challenge. It had expected to approach undetected, but now faced a formidable guardian. Yet the predator was confident in its superior strength and deadly precision. It crouched lower, muscles tensing as Atlas approached. But something unexpected happened. The ground beneath them began to vibrate. Birds scattered from nearby trees in a flurry of wings and alarmed calls. Both Atlas and the cougar froze, sensing a new presence entering their standoff. From the shadows of the forest emerged a massive shape, a brown bear, her fur catching golden highlights in the filtered sunlight. Atlas's barking stopped abruptly. He stood paralyzed between two deadly predators, his instinct to protect Lily warring with his instinct for self-preservation. The cougar hissed, backing away slightly at the sight of the apex predator. But the bear didn't advance toward Atlas or the cougar. Instead, her head swiveled toward the cabin, where Lily's cries had reached a heartbreaking pitch. The bear's ears flattened against her head. Something about the infant's cries triggered a maternal response deep within her. Perhaps she had cubs of her own hidden somewhere in the forest, or perhaps the sound simply awakened something primal and protective. Whatever the reason, the bear huffed loudly and took a step toward the cabin. Atlas's protective instinct flared again. He stepped between the bear and the cabin, his posture not aggressive but determined. His barking had stopped completely now. Instead, he whined softly as if pleading with the bear. In that moment, something remarkable passed between them, a silent understanding that transcended species. Both creatures turned toward the cougar, which had begun to circle around them toward the cabin. The bear's growl reverberated through the clearing, a sound so powerful it seemed to shake the very air. Atlas added his own warning growl, and together they formed an unlikely alliance. The cougar hesitated, calculating its chances against this unexpected partnership. After a tense moment, it slunk backward into the undergrowth, defeated. But the danger hadn't passed entirely. Atlas sensed something else was wrong. Lily's cries had changed. They sounded weaker, more distressed. Without hesitation, Atlas ran back to the cabin, scratching frantically at the door. To his surprise, the bear followed, her massive form moving with unexpected gentleness. She stood behind him, huffing softly as Atlas continued his desperate attempt to reach Lily. Inside, unbeknownst to either animal, a small electrical fire had started behind the wall near Lily's cradle. Smoke was slowly filling the room, causing her cries to weaken as she struggled to breathe. The threat wasn't a predator after all. It was something far more insidious. The bear suddenly rose onto her hind legs, towering over Atlas. With one powerful swipe, she struck the cabin door. The wood splintered but held. She struck again, and this time the door burst open. Atlas darted inside immediately, racing to Lily's cradle as smoke billowed out the open doorway. Gently, he took the edge of her blanket between his teeth and tried to pull her from the cradle, but couldn't lift her properly. The bear lumbered in behind him, ducking her massive frame through the doorway. Together, in an act that defied all natural laws, they managed to move Lily toward the door. Atlas pulling her blanket, while the bear nudged them both forward with her snout. Just as they reached the porch, Wren and Silas came running from the woodshed, having seen the smoke rising from their cabin. They froze at the sight before them. Their daughter on the porch, their dog standing guard beside her, and a massive bear retreating toward the forest's edge. Silas reached for his hunting rifle, but Wren placed a restraining hand on his arm. "No," she whispered, watching as the bear looked back one final time before disappearing into the trees. "They saved her." Atlas whined softly, licking Lily's face as she began to cry again, a strong, healthy sound that filled the clearing. The Morgan family huddled together on the porch as their cabin smoldered, the fire contained to one wall, but their home temporarily uninhabitable. Later, after the fire department had come and gone, after Lily had been examined by paramedics and pronounced perfectly healthy, Wren stood at the edge of the forest. "Thank you," she whispered to the shadowy trees, tears streaming down her face. She knew no one would believe their story. A German shepherd and a wild bear working together to save a human child. But she had seen it with her own eyes. From that day forward, Atlas was treated with a reverence that went beyond the love of a family pet. And each evening he would sit on the porch of their rebuilt cabin, staring into the forest as if waiting for a friend. Sometimes, on quiet nights when the moon was full, they could hear a distant huffing sound from the trees, and Atlas's tail would wag slightly in response. The locals came to call the area Guardian's Grove, though few knew the true story behind the name. But the Morgan family never forgot their miracle, how the desperate barks of a loyal dog and the cries of a helpless infant had awakened something profound in a wild bear, creating an alliance that transcended nature itself. 6 months passed since that fateful day. Spring arrived in the mountains, bringing new life and vibrant green to the forest surrounding the Morgan family's rebuilt cabin. The new structure stood stronger than before, with additional safety features and a special dog door for Atlas, who had earned his place as more than just a pet. He was Lily's guardian, her silent protector. Lily had started crawling, her curious eyes taking in the world around her with wonder. Wren often found her daughter's tiny fingers tangled in Atlas's thick fur, the German shepherd patiently allowing the baby to use him as support as she pulled herself up. Their bond had deepened since the rescue, as if they shared a secret language that no one else understood. One crisp morning, as dew still clung to the grass, Atlas's behavior changed. He paced by the front door, whining softly, not with the panic of that terrible day, but with a strange anticipation. Silas watched him cautiously, the memory of the fire and the bear still fresh in his mind. "What is it, boy?" he asked, hand instinctively moving to the new emergency radio they kept by the door. Atlas wagged his tail and continued his restless movement between the door and Lily, who sat playing with wooden blocks on a colorful blanket. Wren entered from the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel. "He's been doing that all morning. Should we be worried?" Before Silas could answer, a knock sounded at the door. 3 soft, hesitant taps that seemed oddly out of place in their remote location. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles down the mountain, and they rarely received visitors without warning. Atlas didn't bark. Instead, he sat calmly, tail sweeping across the wooden floor, as Silas cautiously opened the door. A woman stood on their porch, her weathered face framed by silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a tight braid. She wore simple hiking clothes and carried a small leather backpack. Something about her eyes, deep amber, almost golden, made Silas pause. "Can I help you?" he asked, body positioned to block entrance if necessary. "My name is Nora Blackwood," the woman said, her voice low and melodic. "I believe we have a mutual friend." Her eyes drifted to Atlas, who had moved forward to sniff her outstretched hand. Wren appeared beside Silas, Lily balanced on her hip. "How did you find us?" Nora's gaze moved to Lily, and something flickered across her face. Recognition, wonder, or perhaps both. "The story reached me. About what happened last autumn, about the bear." Silas tensed. They had told no one the full story, knowing it would sound like a desperate fabrication. The official report mentioned only a house fire and a quick rescue, nothing about the cougar or the bear that had broken down their door. "I don't know what you've heard, but—" Silas began. "I know because I've seen her," Nora interrupted gently. "The bear who saved your daughter. She's special. The locals call her Mahwa, the Watcher. She's been protecting these mountains for almost 15 years. Atlas whined softly, pressing against Nora's leg with unusual familiarity. "You should come inside," Wren said suddenly, stepping back. Something in the woman's earnest expression had touched her. "I think we have a lot to talk about." Over coffee at their kitchen table, Nora revealed her story. She wasn't just a hiker or local. She was a wildlife biologist who had been studying the unusual behavior patterns of the bear population in these mountains for over a decade, and Mahwa was her primary subject. 7 years ago, I found her caught in an illegal trap, Nora explained, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. She was younger then, severely injured and frightened. I helped free her and treated her wounds. Since then, we've formed a connection. She smiled slightly at their skeptical expressions. I know how it sounds. Not as strange as a bear and a dog working together to save a baby from a house fire, Silas admitted grudgingly. Nora nodded. Exactly. Mawa isn't like other bears. She's shown unusual altruistic behavior toward other species, warning deer of approaching hunters, guiding lost hikers back to trails by deliberately leaving tracks. But what she did here, with your dog and your daughter, she shook her head in wonder. It's unprecedented. Why are you telling us this now? Wren asked, bouncing Lily gently as she began to fuss. Nora's expression grew serious. Because Mahwa is in danger. The Forest Service has authorized a controlled hunt in this region after reports of aggressive bear activity near the new tourism development 10 miles south. They don't know they're targeting her specifically, but she's distinctive, larger than average with that light patch on her shoulder. Atlas suddenly stood, hackles raised as he stared out the window. All three adults followed his gaze to see a dark shape moving at the forest's edge, not the massive form of a bear, but the sleek, deadly silhouette of the mountain cougar. He's back, Silas whispered, reaching for his rifle. No, wait, Nora said, placing a restraining hand on his arm. Look. Another shape emerged from the trees, the unmistakable form of Mahwa. The bear moved with purpose, not toward the cabin, but parallel to it, clearly visible, as if deliberately showing herself. The cougar retreated further into the shadows, but didn't leave. They're warning us, Nora said softly. Something's wrong. As if confirming her words, a distant rumble echoed through the mountains. At first, Silas thought it was thunder, but the clear blue sky contradicted that assumption. The rumble grew, and fine particles of dust began to dance in the sunbeams coming through the windows. Landslide, Nora breathed, just as the emergency radio crackled to life. Attention residents of the northern ridge, a static-filled voice announced. Flash flood warnings in effect. Recent erosion has compromised the old mining dam. Immediate evacuation advised for all residents below the 5,000-foot mark. Wren clutched Lily tighter. That's us. We're at 4,800 feet. Silas was already moving, grabbing the emergency backpack they kept ready. The road will be the first thing to go if the dam breaks. We need to move uphill now. Atlas barked once, sharp and commanding, then darted to the door, looking back expectantly. He wants us to follow him, Wren said, already pulling on Lily's tiny jacket. Nora nodded. The animals know these mountains better than any evacuation route. If we go up the eastern ridge, we might be able to get above the flood zone. They rushed outside, the distant rumbling growing louder. Atlas led the way, pausing occasionally to ensure they followed. To their surprise, both Mawa and the cougar had disappeared from the forest's edge. The climb was steeper than it looked. Silas carried Lily in a front pack, while Wren and Nora followed, occasionally reaching out to steady each other on the rough terrain. Atlas moved confidently ahead, stopping at forks in the crude trail, always choosing the path that led upward. An hour into their climb, with their cabin now a tiny speck below, they heard it, the deafening crack of the dam giving way, followed by the thunderous roar of water surging through the valley. They watched in horror as their cabin disappeared beneath a churning wall of mud and debris. If we'd waited for official evacuation... Wren couldn't finish the thought, tears streaming down her face. Atlas suddenly growled, not at them but at something ahead on the trail. The bushes rustled, and the mountain cougar appeared, its yellow eyes fixed on them. Before anyone could react, the big cat turned and padded up the trail, stopping to look back as if expecting them to follow. "This is impossible," Silas whispered. No, Nora said, her voice filled with wonder. This is Mahwa's influence. Somehow, she's communicated our need to other predators. The normal rules don't apply. With Atlas behind them and the cougar ahead, they continued their ascent. The trail grew narrower, skirting a steep drop-off that had Wren pressing close to the mountainside, her breath coming in frightened gasps. "We can't go this way," she protested, as loose stones skittered down the slope beneath her feet. "It's too dangerous with Lily." As if in answer, a low huffing sound came from above them. Mahwa stood on a ledge 20 feet higher, watching them with those intelligent eyes. The bear turned and disappeared into a crevice in the rock face, a narrow opening that might lead to safer ground. "She's showing us a way through," Nora said with certainty. "There must be a cave system." Silas looked doubtful. "Following a bear into a cave with our baby? Have we lost our minds?" A crack split the air, and part of the trail behind them collapsed, cutting off their retreat. The decision was made for them. The cave opening was tight but navigable. Silas went first with Lily, who had remained surprisingly calm throughout the ordeal, her wide eyes taking in everything with unusual alertness. Wren followed, then Nora, with Atlas bringing up the rear. The cougar had vanished, its role in their journey apparently complete. Inside, the passage widened into a larger cavern illuminated by patches of light filtering through cracks in the ceiling. To their amazement, the space showed signs of habitation. Not human, but not entirely animal either. Fresh pine boughs were arranged in one corner, forming a sort of nest. Scattered about were unusual objects: a tattered backpack, a child's stuffed toy, a metal water bottle. "What is this place?" Wren asked, her voice echoing slightly. Nora moved deeper into the cave, examining the items with growing excitement. "I've heard rumors. Stories from the indigenous people of this region about guardian spirits that take the form of animals to protect the mountains and those who respect them." She picked up the stuffed toy, a worn teddy bear missing one eye. "These must be items from people Mahwa has helped over the years." "You're saying the bear collects souvenirs from people she rescues?" Silas couldn't keep the skepticism from his voice, despite everything they had witnessed. A low huffing sound from the shadows made them all turn. Mahwa stood in a previously unnoticed passage, her massive form blocking most of the opening. Beside her, a smaller shape moved. A bear cub, probably born that spring, its fur still fluffy and its movements awkward. "Her cub," Nora whispered. "She's showing us her cub." Atlas approached slowly, ears forward with interest rather than aggression. The German shepherd stopped a respectful distance from the bears, sitting down as if in greeting. The cub took a tentative step forward, curious despite its mother's protective presence. Something about its movement seemed odd, and as it came further into the light, they understood why. The cub was favoring its right side, the left front paw held slightly above the ground. "It's injured," Wren said softly. Nora nodded. "That might explain part of this. Mahwa remembers human help from when I treated her years ago. She may associate humans with healing." "You think she wants us to help her cub?" Silas asked incredulously. "I think she brought us here for mutual benefit," Nora replied. "She saved us from the flood, and in return—" Wren was already moving, slow and deliberate, toward her backpack. "I have a first aid kit. If it's just a thorn or minor cut, maybe we can help." What followed was perhaps the most surreal experience of their lives. While the adults created a makeshift examination area, Atlas and Lily sat together nearby, the baby occasionally babbling happily, as if this extraordinary circumstance was perfectly normal. Mahua watched from her position at the tunnel entrance, alert but allowing Nora to gently examine her cub's injured paw. "It's a deep splinter, probably from climbing," Nora announced after careful inspection. "I can remove it, but we'll need to clean the wound afterward." With steady hands and soft reassurances, she extracted a long, sharp wood fragment from the cub's paw, quickly applying antibiotic ointment from Wren's kit before the startled young bear could react. The cub whimpered once but remained surprisingly still, as if understanding the momentary pain was necessary. Once treated, the cub tested its paw gingerly, then bounced back to its mother with renewed energy. Mahua huffed softly, nudging her healthy offspring with evident satisfaction. "Now what?" Silas asked, looking from the bears to the cave entrance. "The flood will have taken out all the roads. We could be stranded for days." As darkness fell, they settled into an uneasy camp within the cave. The bears retreated to their own chamber but remained nearby, their occasional sounds a strange comfort in the unfamiliar setting. Atlas positioned himself protectively near Lily's makeshift bed, his eyes reflecting the dim light of their emergency lantern. In the quiet hours of night, with Silas and Wren finally sleeping from exhaustion, Nora sat awake, making notes in a small journal. The events of the day defied scientific explanation, yet she had witnessed them firsthand. Interspecies cooperation on this level suggested something profound about animal cognition and the possibility of cross-species empathy. Atlas suddenly raised his head, ears alert. Nora followed his gaze to see Mahua standing at the passage entrance again, watching them silently. The bear's eyes seemed to hold a depth of understanding that sent shivers down Nora's spine. "You're more than just an animal, aren't you?" she whispered. Mahua huffed softly, then turned and vanished into the darkness of the connecting tunnel. Dawn brought new sounds to the cave, the rhythmic thump of helicopter rotors. The Forest Service's search and rescue operation was in full swing, looking for survivors of the devastating flood. Nora led the group to a clearing visible from the air, where they were spotted and eventually evacuated to safety. As the helicopter lifted off, Wren caught a final glimpse of two shapes watching from the tree line: a massive bear and a loyal German shepherd, standing side by side in defiance of nature's normal boundaries. Atlas had chosen to remain behind, somehow communicating to them that his place was now with Mahua and her cub, at least for a time. 3 weeks later, as the Morgan family settled into temporary housing in the nearest town, a familiar bark sounded outside their door. Atlas had returned, healthy and seemingly satisfied with whatever mission he had undertaken in the mountains. And around his neck, secured with a crude vine rope, hung a small polished stone, smooth and black with a single streak of white running through it. "A gift from Mahua," Nora suggested when she visited them later that week. A token of the bond they formed. The Forest Service eventually abandoned their planned hunt after a comprehensive study led by Nora revealed the unusual behavior patterns of the bear population, particularly Mahua. The area was instead designated as a protected wildlife sanctuary, with the Morgan family's property at its heart once they rebuilt their home. Years passed. Lily grew from a crawling infant to a running toddler, and then to a curious child with a special affinity for animals. Atlas remained her constant companion, growing gray around the muzzle but still vigilant. And occasionally, on special nights when the moon was full, they would sit together on their porch and watch as a mother bear, and her growing cub emerged briefly from the trees, a silent greeting between two families whose lives had become inexplicably intertwined. The locals still called the area Guardian's Grove, but now the name carried official recognition and a growing legend. Travelers passing through would often leave small offerings at the forest's edge. tokens of respect for the unusual guardian who watched over the mountains and those who dwelled within them. And deep in the heart of the sanctuary, in a cave few humans would ever find, a collection of treasures grew. A child's drawing of a girl, a dog, and a bear standing together beneath a bright sun. A worn leather collar too small for a growing German shepherd, and a family photograph showing Lily on her 5th birthday, her arms wrapped around Atlas's neck, with Silas, Wren, and Nora smiling beside them. Some bonds, once formed, transcend the boundaries of species and understanding. They become their own kind of magic, not the fantastical sort from children's tales, but the profound, mysterious connection between living beings who have chosen, against all odds and instincts, to protect rather than harm, to save rather than destroy. And in the quiet mountains of Guardian's Grove, that magic continued to grow, watched over by amber eyes that held more wisdom than any human could truly comprehend. 10 years passed like the changing seasons in Guardian's Grove. Lily Morgan had grown into a thoughtful 15-year-old with her mother's quiet strength and her father's determination. Her childhood experiences had shaped her into someone extraordinary, a young woman who moved through the forest with the ease of someone born to it, who could read animal tracks like others read books, and who carried within her a profound connection to the wild that few could understand. Atlas, now elderly with a completely white muzzle and slower gait, remained devoted to Lily. Though no longer able to bound through the forest as he once had, his senses remained sharp, his protective instinct undiminished by age. Nora had become a permanent fixture in their lives, establishing a small research station nearby where she documented the unusual behavior patterns of Guardian's Grove's wildlife. The Morgan family's rebuilt home had become something of a local landmark, an unusual structure that incorporated elements of both human comfort and animal accessibility. Wide ramps allowed Atlas to move easily between levels despite his aging joints. Large windows offered views of the surrounding forest from every room. Most unusually, a special sheltered platform extended from one side of the house, accessible through a custom door, what the family simply called Mahwa's porch, though the bear rarely approached the house directly anymore. Over the years, the legend of Guardian's Grove had spread, attracting attention both welcome and unwelcome. Wildlife researchers came to study under Nora's guidance. Conservationists championed the sanctuary as a model for human-wildlife coexistence. But others came with less noble intentions, thrill-seekers hoping to photograph the miracle bear, poachers drawn by rumors of exceptional animals worth trophy fees, developers eyeing the pristine land beyond the sanctuary's borders. It was on a crisp autumn morning, reminiscent of that fateful day 15 years earlier, when everything changed again. Lily woke before dawn, disturbed by Atlas's uncharacteristic whining beside her bed. The elderly dog paced with an urgency she hadn't seen in years. "What is it, boy?" she whispered, reaching for the worn leather journal she kept by her bedside, a habit learned from Nora, recording every unusual animal behavior. Atlas moved to her window, placing his front paws on the sill with effort. Lily joined him, peering into the pre-dawn darkness. At first, she saw nothing unusual in the misty forest. Then a flash of movement caught her eye, too organized, too deliberate for wildlife. Flashlight beams cut through the trees, moving in a coordinated pattern. She reached for her phone, texting her parents who were away at a conservation conference with Nora. Someone in the sanctuary, multiple people, moving with purpose. Silas's response came immediately. "Call Ranger Station. Don't engage, we're 3 hours away." But Atlas wouldn't settle, his whining growing more insistent. Something beyond trespassers was disturbing him. Lily pulled on her boots and jacket, decision made. She wouldn't confront the intruders, but she needed to know what they were doing in the protected area. Grabbing her wildlife observation kit, binoculars, a small camera with night vision capability, and a satellite tracker Nora had insisted she carry, she slipped out the back door with Atlas following closely. They moved silently through familiar paths, Lily careful to stay downwind of the intruders. As they drew closer, she caught fragments of hushed conversation. Tranquilizers ready, large enough dose for a bear her size. Worth a fortune to the private collector, extinct bear subspecies. Cub should fetch almost as much, trained from youth. Cold dread settled in Lily's stomach. These weren't just trespassers. They were professional animal traffickers, and they were after Mahwa and her offspring. The extinct subspecies comment confused her until she remembered Nora's research suggesting Mahwa might carry genetic markers from a bear population thought to have disappeared a century ago. Atlas suddenly tensed beside her, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Before Lily could quiet him, a sharp crack echoed through the trees, the unmistakable sound of a tranquilizer gun. A pained roar followed, then silence. "Got her!" a triumphant voice called. "Move in. Secure the target before she goes down completely." Without thinking, Lily activated the emergency beacon on her satellite tracker, then fumbled for her phone to call the ranger station. As she whispered urgent details to the dispatcher, Atlas slipped away into the undergrowth. By the time she noticed his absence, it was too late to call him back without revealing their position. "Stay hidden," the dispatcher instructed. "Rangers are 15 minutes out. Wildlife officers alerted." 15 minutes might be too late. Cautiously, Lily crept forward until she could see the scene through a screen of ferns. 4 figures in dark clothing surrounded a large form on the ground. Mahwa, partially sedated but still conscious, her massive head swaying as she fought the drugs. 2 more men approached with restraints. Of Mahwa's offspring, now a fully grown bear in his own right, there was no sign. A familiar bark shattered the tense silence. Atlas, standing in full view at the edge of the clearing, hackles raised despite his age. The traffickers turned in surprise, momentarily distracted from Mahwa. "Just some old dog," one muttered, raising his tranquilizer gun. "Probably belongs to the ranger station." Before he could fire, an ear-splitting roar came from the opposite side of the clearing. Mahwa's grown cub burst from the trees, charging the man with the gun. The traffickers scattered in panic, their coordinated professionalism dissolving in the face of 500 pounds of maternal fury. In the chaos, no one noticed Mahwa beginning to rise, fighting off the partial dose of sedative through sheer will. No one except Lily, who watched in awe as the bear she had known all her life staggered to her feet. What followed was unlike anything Lily had ever witnessed. Atlas, despite his age, darted between the traffickers with surprising agility, snapping at ankles and creating confusion. Mahwa's offspring herded the panicked men away from his mother, not attacking directly but using his massive presence to intimidate. And Mahwa herself, swaying but determined, positioned herself between the traffickers and the direction of Lily's hiding place, as if knowing exactly where the girl was concealed. A new sound joined the commotion, the distinctive snarl of the mountain cougar. The big cat appeared on a rock outcropping above the clearing, amber eyes gleaming in the growing dawn light. The traffickers found themselves surrounded by what appeared to be a coordinated animal response, impossible, yet happening before their eyes. "What the hell kind of place is this?" one man shouted, fumbling to reload his weapon. The answer came from behind them as floodlights suddenly illuminated the clearing. "This is Guardians Grove Wildlife Sanctuary," a ranger's voice announced through a megaphone. "Drop your weapons and place your hands above your heads. You are surrounded." In the confusion of arrests that followed, no one questioned why 3 apex predators had worked in apparent coordination to protect each other, or how they had vanished into the forest before the authorities could document their unusual behavior. No one except Lily, who had witnessed it all from her hidden vantage point. Later that day, as her parents and Nora rushed home to find her safely recounting her observations to astonished wildlife officers, Lily kept one detail to herself: how, just before disappearing into the trees, Mahua had turned to look directly at her hiding place, their eyes meeting across the clearing in a moment of connection that transcended species. "The trafficking ring has been on our radar for months," the lead officer explained to the assembled group at the Morgan home. "They specialize in exotic and rare animals for private collectors. Your sanctuary has been targeted because of the unusual genetic markers identified in Dr. Blackwood's research." "But how did they know?" Silas demanded. "Nora's findings haven't been published yet." An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. Finally, Nora spoke, her voice heavy with betrayal. "My research assistant. He disappeared 3 weeks ago with copies of my preliminary data. I thought he'd been poached by a rival research institute." "We'll need to implement better security protocols," the officer continued, "and keep the most sensitive aspects of your research classified for now." After the authorities left, the family sat together on their porch in stunned silence, watching the sun set over the forest that had once again proven to be more mysterious than they had imagined. "I've been thinking," Lily said finally, "about what happened today and 15 years ago. About Atlas and Mahua and even the cougar." She stroked Atlas's head as he dozed beside her. "What if it's not just unusual behavior? What if it's something more?" "What do you mean?" Wren asked, studying her daughter's thoughtful expression. "Nora's research shows heightened intelligence in Guardians Grove predators, right? But what if it's not just intelligence?" Lily leaned forward, eyes bright with excitement. "What if it's communication? What if somehow they've learned to understand each other and us?" Silas exchanged glances with Nora. "That's a pretty extraordinary claim, sweetheart." "More extraordinary than a bear and a dog working together to save a baby?" Lily challenged. "More extraordinary than 3 predator species coordinating to protect each other from poachers." No one had an answer for that. The incident brought unwanted attention to Guardians Grove. News outlets picked up the story of the attempted wildlife trafficking, though the official reports mentioned nothing about coordinated animal behavior. Scientists from around the world contacted Nora, seeking collaboration or access to her research. Government officials debated increasing the sanctuary's protected status. Through it all, Lily continued her own quiet observations, spending hours in the forest with Atlas always by her side. Though his movements had grown stiffer and slower since the confrontation with the traffickers, his senses remained sharp. Together they tracked Mahua and her offspring, documenting their movements from a respectful distance. It was during one such excursion, nearly a month after the trafficking incident, when Lily made a discovery that would change everything. Deep in the sanctuary, in an area rarely visited even by researchers, she and Atlas came upon a series of unusual markings carved into the trunks of ancient trees, deliberate patterns that resembled no natural formation Lily had ever seen. "Look at this, Atlas," she whispered, tracing the markings with her fingers. They were weathered with age, suggesting they had been there for decades, perhaps centuries. Some resembled animal forms, bears, wolves, eagles, while others formed abstract patterns that nevertheless felt intentional. Atlas whined softly, pressing against her leg as a familiar huffing sound came from behind them. Lily turned slowly to find Mahwa watching from 20 feet away, the bear's massive form partially hidden by the dappled forest light. For a breathless moment, they regarded each other in silence. Then, with deliberate movements, Mahwa approached one of the marked trees and rose onto her hind legs, placing a massive paw against a spiral pattern carved into the bark. Lily's heart pounded as understanding dawned. "You know these markings," she whispered. "You understand what they mean." As if in answer, Mahwa dropped to all fours and moved deeper into the forest, pausing to look back at Lily in what could only be described as invitation. What followed was a journey unlike any Lily had experienced in her 15 years exploring Guardian's Grove. With Atlas limping determinedly beside her, she followed Mahwa through increasingly unfamiliar territory, each new area revealing more of the mysterious markings. They climbed higher into the mountains, beyond even the boundaries of the protected sanctuary, until they reached a plateau overlooking the entire valley. There, partially hidden by a stand of ancient cedar trees, stood a structure that defied explanation. A circle of standing stones, weathered by centuries of mountain storms yet unmistakably arranged by human hands. Each stone bore elaborate carvings, similar to those Lily had seen on the trees, but more complex, more detailed. And at the center of the circle lay a flat stone altar, its surface worn smooth. "What is this place?" Lily breathed, though she expected no answer. To her astonishment, a voice responded. Not Mahwa, who stood silently at the edge of the stone circle, but a human voice. The old ones called it the Speaker's Circle. Lily spun around to find an elderly man watching her from the shadow of a massive cedar. His weathered face bore the deep lines of one who had spent a lifetime outdoors, and his eyes, startlingly amber like Mahwa's, regarded her with calm interest. Atlas showed no alarm at the stranger's presence, which surprised Lily more than anything else. The old German shepherd merely wagged his tail in greeting. "Who are you?" Lily asked, instinctively stepping closer to Mahwa rather than away. The old man smiled. "My name is Joseph Blackwood. I believe you know my daughter, Nora." "Blackwood," Lily repeated in shock. "But Nora said her father disappeared in these mountains 30 years ago. She believes he died in a climbing accident." Joseph nodded sadly. That's what she needed to believe. The truth was more complicated. His gaze shifted to Mahwa. As complicated as a bear who saves human children and remembers human kindness across decades. "You know about Mahwa?" Lily asked. "I've known Mahwa her entire life," Joseph replied. "I was there when she was born, here in this sacred place where the boundaries between animal and human understanding grow thin." He gestured to the stone circle. The indigenous people who first inhabited these mountains believed this was a place where humans could learn the language of animals, and animals could understand the hearts of humans. "That's impossible," Lily said, though her own experiences suggested otherwise. Joseph merely smiled. "Is it? You followed a bear to a hidden sacred site where you've just met a man presumed dead for 3 decades. Your family was saved by the coordinated efforts of 3 predator species. Your childhood was protected by a German shepherd who somehow communicated with a wild bear." He shrugged. "Perhaps impossible simply means we haven't learned to listen properly." Mahwa huffed softly, settling onto her haunches beside one of the standing stones as if she were a participant in the conversation rather than just a remarkable animal. "Why did she bring me here?" Lily asked, glancing between Joseph and Mahwa. "Because Guardian's Grove is in danger," Joseph replied, his expression growing serious. Not just from traffickers and poachers, but from something far more insidious. The land beyond the sanctuary's boundaries has been sold to multinational mining interests. They've discovered rare earth minerals essential for modern technology, and they plan to begin operations within months. How do you know this? I have my sources, Joseph said enigmatically. The point is, once mining begins, it will pollute the watershed that feeds the entire ecosystem. Guardian's Grove will die slowly, poisoned from within. Atlas whined softly, moving to stand beside Mahua in a tableau that struck Lily as profoundly symbolic. "What can we do?" she asked, already knowing her life had changed irrevocably with this discovery. Joseph's amber eyes seemed to glow in the fading light. "That depends on how much you're willing to believe and how far you're willing to go to protect this place." He gestured to the stone altar. "The old stories say that on certain nights when the moon is full and the veil between worlds is thin, a human who has been touched by the wild can forge a deeper bond with the animals who have chosen them." "What kind of bond?" Lily asked, thinking of Atlas, of Mahua, of all the creatures that had been part of her extraordinary life. "A sharing of perception," Joseph said quietly. "The human gains the ability to see through animal eyes, to understand their communication, and the animals gain something too, a human voice to speak for them in the world of men." It sounded like fantasy, like the kind of legend that grew around campfires. Yet Lily stood in a hidden stone circle with a man long thought dead and a bear who had saved her life as an infant. The boundaries of what she considered possible had already been redrawn many times. "The full moon is tomorrow night," Joseph continued. "If you choose to return, I can show you the old ways. But the choice must be yours, freely made." Lily looked at Atlas, her lifelong protector now nearing the end of his remarkable life. She looked at Mahua, the wild bear who had defied every natural instinct to forge connections beyond understanding. And she made her decision. "I'll come back," she promised. "But first I need to tell my parents and Nora where I've been and who I've found." The reunion between Nora and her long-lost father unfolded with tears and recriminations, joy and disbelief. Joseph explained his disappearance, how, after discovering the speaker's circle and witnessing the unusual behavior of Guardian's Grove's wildlife, he had chosen to remain, learning the old ways from an elderly indigenous woman who was the last keeper of her tribe's knowledge. "She taught me to listen," he told his stunned daughter and the Morgan family. "Not just with my ears, but with something deeper. When she died, I became the guardian of this knowledge. I couldn't leave, couldn't return to the world that would have dismissed everything I had learned as superstition and fantasy." "But you let me believe you were dead," Nora said, pain evident in her voice. "Would you have understood?" Joseph asked gently, "the ambitious young scientist you were then?" Nora had no answer, but the tears in her eyes spoke volumes. When Lily explained about the mining company and the threat to Guardian's Grove, Silas immediately began making calls to his contacts in environmental law, while Wren reached out to media connections from her days as a journalist. But Joseph shook his head. "Legal battles will take years. The mining will have begun before the first injunction can be filed." He looked at Lily. "There is another way, if you're still willing." And so, on the night of the full moon, Lily found herself once again at the speaker's circle, this time accompanied by her parents, Nora and Joseph. Atlas walked slowly beside her, each step clearly painful but his determination undiminished. Mahua awaited them, along with her grown offspring and, remarkably, the mountain cougar that had been part of their story from the beginning. Other animals gathered at the periphery: wolves, foxes, eagles perched in the surrounding trees, even small creatures like rabbits and squirrels, all behaving with unusual calm in the presence of predators. "It's like they're waiting for something," Wren whispered, clutching Silas's hand tightly. "They are," Joseph confirmed, arranging ancient carved stones in a pattern on the central altar. For centuries, the speaker's circle has been a place of communion between the human and animal worlds. Tonight, we renew that connection. The ceremony that followed was both simple and profound. Joseph had Lily sit cross-legged before the altar, Atlas resting against her with his head in her lap. A small fire burned, fed with herbs that filled the air with sweet, intoxicating smoke. Joseph spoke words in a language Lily didn't recognize, ancient indigenous phrases passed down through generations. Mahwa approached, her massive form ghostly in the moonlight, and placed one huge paw on the altar stone. Joseph nodded encouragingly to Lily, who tentatively placed her hand atop the bear's paw. A jolt of sensation passed through her, not painful, but intensely disorienting. For a breathless moment, Lily's perception shifted, how she saw the circle through Mahwa's eyes, colors muted, but scents and sounds incredibly vivid. She felt the bear's consciousness, not human-like thoughts, but complex awareness, memories, intentions that transcended mere instinct. Then she was back in her own body, gasping. I felt. Joseph nodded. The connection has begun. With practice, you'll learn to move between perspectives to truly understand their communication. But how does this help against the mining company? Silas asked skeptically. Because now Lily can be a true witness, Joseph explained. She can document the remarkable cognitive abilities and social structures of Guardians Grove's wildlife with an insider's perspective no other researcher has ever had. Evidence that will make these animals impossible to dismiss as mere resources to be displaced for profit. You want me to become a scientific whistleblower, Lily realized. I want you to become a bridge, Joseph corrected, between their world and ours, the youngest speaker in generations, but perhaps the most important. The months that followed transformed Guardians Grove and all who lived there. With her newfound ability to perceive through animal senses, Lily documented behaviors that astounded the scientific community. Evidence of complex communication between species, cooperative problem-solving, and what could only be described as culture passing between generations of animals. Nora's research, augmented by Lily's unique observations, sparked international interest. The mining company faced unexpected resistance as Guardians Grove became a symbol of revolutionary understanding between humans and wildlife. When independent researchers verified aspects of Lily's documentation, the sanctuary's boundaries were expanded under emergency protection orders. Atlas lived just long enough to see Guardians Grove secure temporary protection. On a crisp autumn morning, 16 years after he had first alerted the Morgan family to danger, the loyal German shepherd passed peacefully in his sleep, his head resting in Lily's lap as she sat on their porch. That night, wolves howled in the forest for hours, a mournful chorus that seemed to honor his passing. A week later, Mahwa appeared at the edge of the forest near the Morgan home, accompanied by a small, fluffy figure. A German shepherd puppy with distinctive markings, clearly a stray or abandoned pet the bear had found. The puppy bounded fearlessly up to Lily, amber eyes bright with intelligence. "A gift," Joseph said quietly, standing beside his daughter as they watched from the porch, and a sign that the work continues. Lily knelt to greet the puppy, tears streaming down her face as she recognized something familiar in those amber eyes. Not Atlas returned, but perhaps a new guardian, chosen with purpose. "What will you name him?" Wren asked, smiling through her own tears. Lily looked up at Mahwa, still watching from the forest's edge, and reached out with her mind, using the connection forged at the speaker's circle. A sense of approval flowed back to her, along with an impression of stars wheeling overhead, of endless cycles of death and rebirth, of connections that transcended single lifetimes. "Phoenix," Lily said softly. "His name is Phoenix." As if in agreement, the puppy barked once, a sound that echoed through Guardian's Grove like a promise. The legal battle for permanent protection of the expanded sanctuary would continue for years. The scientific revolution sparked by Lily's abilities would face skepticism and resistance from conventional researchers. Joseph's reappearance and the secrets of the speaker's circle would attract those seeking to exploit rather than understand. But in that moment, as Lily held her new companion and felt Mahwa's watchful presence, she knew with absolute certainty that Guardian's Grove would endure. Not because of legal protections or scientific validation, but because of something far more powerful: the profound, mysterious bond between species who had chosen, against all odds and expectations, to protect rather than harm, to understand rather than fear. And in the quiet mountains of Guardian's Grove, beneath the ancient stones of the speaker's circle, that bond continued to strengthen, guarded by a girl who could speak with animals and a bear who had learned to trust humans, their unlikely alliance a testament to possibilities yet undiscovered in the space between wilderness and civilization. 5 years passed. Guardian's Grove had transformed from a small, relatively unknown wildlife sanctuary to an internationally recognized research center for interspecies communication. Lily Morgan, now 20 years old, had grown into her role as a speaker with grace and determination. Phoenix, the German shepherd gifted to her by Mahwa, had matured into a powerful, intelligent companion with the same protective instinct that had made Atlas legendary. The Morgan family home had expanded to include a state-of-the-art research facility where Nora and her father Joseph worked alongside visiting scientists from around the world. The mining company had eventually withdrawn its plans after international pressure, and the discovery of alternative, less environmentally harmful sites for extraction. Guardian's Grove's boundaries had been formally expanded to include the speaker's circle, classified as both an ecological preserve and an indigenous cultural heritage site. For Lily, the years had been a journey of discovery, learning to refine her unique ability to perceive through animal senses and communicate across species boundaries. Under Joseph's guidance, she had accessed increasingly complex forms of understanding, not just sensory perceptions, but emotional states, intentions, and even fragments of generational memory passed between animal mothers and their offspring. But with recognition had come scrutiny. Mainstream scientific publications remained skeptical of the Morgan Blackwood research, despite growing evidence. Religious groups alternately claimed Lily's abilities as proof of divine harmony, or denounced them as unnatural. Government agencies expressed interest in potential applications that made Lily deeply uncomfortable. And beneath it all ran currents of tension within the family itself, particularly between Joseph, with his mystical approach to the speaker's gift, and Nora, who insisted on rigorous scientific methodology. It was on a crisp autumn evening, the 20th anniversary of Lily's rescue as an infant, when everything changed again. The Morgan family had gathered for their annual commemoration, a quiet dinner followed by a walk to the edge of the forest where they would leave offerings of gratitude. Joseph and Nora joined them, their father-daughter relationship still tentative but warming over shared purpose. As they sat on the porch after dinner, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, Phoenix suddenly stood, ears alert. Seconds later, Lily felt it too, a distant sense of urgency pulsing through her speaker's connection. Something was happening deep in Guardian's Grove, something that had alarmed the entire network of wildlife with whom she shared consciousness. "What is it?" Wren asked, recognizing the familiar signs of Lily accessing her gift. "I'm not sure," Lily replied, her voice distant as she opened her mind to the sensory input flooding in from multiple animals. "There's confusion, fear, something unfamiliar." Phoenix whined softly, pressing against her leg. Through their special bond, stronger than even what she shared with other animals, Lily perceived fragments of what the dog was experiencing: strange scents, mechanical sounds, a sense of wrongness in the forest's heart. "I need to go see," she said, already rising. "Not alone," Silas insisted, reaching for his jacket. Though his hair had silvered over the years, he remained physically active, a necessary adaptation to life with a daughter who routinely communicated with predators. "I'll come too," Joseph offered, exchanging glances with Nora. "We should document whatever's happening." They set out as twilight deepened, Phoenix leading the way along familiar trails. Lily moved in a state of divided consciousness, physically present but simultaneously perceiving fragments of awareness from various animals throughout the sanctuary. She felt Mahwa's alertness from somewhere to the north, the cougar's focused attention from a ridgeline, and the scattered anxiety of smaller creatures. 2 miles into their journey, they began to detect what had disturbed the forest's equilibrium, a low, pulsing sound unlike anything naturally occurring in Guardian's Grove. As they drew closer, Phoenix growing increasingly agitated, Lily recognized it as mechanical in origin. "There," Silas whispered, pointing to an unnatural glow visible through the trees ahead. They approached cautiously, using the cover of vegetation. In a small clearing that shouldn't have existed, trees had been freshly cut, their stumps still oozing sap, stood a temporary structure surrounded by sophisticated equipment. Solar panels gleamed in the fading light, powering what appeared to be monitoring stations and communication devices. Most disturbing was a circular array of metal rods driven into the ground in a pattern that sent chills down Lily's spine. It mirrored almost exactly the arrangement of standing stones at the speaker's circle, though rendered in cold technology rather than ancient rock. "What is this?" she breathed, instinctively reaching for Phoenix's reassuring presence beside her. Movement caught their attention as a figure emerged from the temporary structure. A woman in her 40s, dressed in practical outdoor clothing but with a demeanor that spoke of corporate rather than scientific backgrounds. She was followed by 2 assistants carrying electronic equipment. "Power levels holding steady," one reported. "The frequency is matching the geological anomalies precisely." "Excellent," the woman replied, her voice carrying clearly in the evening air. "If Dr. Chen's theories are correct, we should be able to disrupt the unusual electromagnetic patterns in this region within days. Once we neutralize whatever is causing the behavioral anomalies in the local wildlife, we can proceed with Phase 2. Joseph made a small, distressed sound. Lily turned to see her mentor's face had gone pale. "Do you know what they're doing?" she whispered. He nodded grimly. "They're trying to destroy the speaker's circle, or rather, what makes it work." At her confused expression, he continued. "The indigenous people believed the circle was a sacred place where human and animal minds could meet. Modern science might call it a unique electromagnetic phenomenon that facilitates neural synchronization across species. Either way, that equipment is designed to disrupt it." "But who would want to do that?" Silas asked, keeping his voice low. "And how did they get past our security?" "I have a terrible suspicion," Joseph murmured, his eyes fixed on the woman directing the operation. "That's Eleanor Mercer, former research director for BioSync Corporation. They've been trying to discredit our work for years. Our findings threaten their patents on several communication enhancement drugs." Lily felt a surge of protectiveness, not just for herself and her family, but for the entire ecosystem with which she'd formed such profound bonds. Through her speaker's connection, she sensed animals gathering in a wide perimeter around the clearing, drawn by her attention and their own wariness of the disturbance. "We need to report this," Silas said firmly. "This is trespassing at minimum, potentially criminal sabotage." "Wait," Lily cautioned, placing a hand on her father's arm. "I want to understand exactly what they're planning first." She closed her eyes, reaching out through her gift to the assembled wildlife. "We need to watch. We need to listen. No confrontation yet." The response came as a wave of agreement. Cautious acquiescence from Mahwa somewhere to the north, predatory patience from the cougar, and collective vigilance from the smaller creatures whose eyes and ears now became extensions of Lily's awareness. For the next hour, they observed as the team activated additional equipment, took readings, and made adjustments to their array. Through fragments of conversation, they learned the disturbing truth. BioSync had developed technology specifically designed to neutralize what they called the Guardian's Grove anomaly. They believed that by generating a counter-frequency to the natural electromagnetic patterns of the region, they could permanently disrupt the conditions that facilitated interspecies neural synchronization. "It's a field test," Eleanor explained to her team as night fully descended. "If we can nullify the effect here, we can prove the Morgan-Blackwood research is based on a localized geological phenomenon, not actual interspecies communication. BioSync's neural enhancement technologies will remain the only scientifically validated method for advanced communication." "That's why they're doing this," Lily whispered incredulous. "To protect their market share?" Joseph's expression was grim. "Knowledge is power, and some forms of power are worth billions. If what we've discovered here became widely accepted, that natural cross-species communication is possible without technological intervention, several very profitable industries would collapse overnight." As they prepared to retreat and alert authorities, disaster struck. Phoenix, detecting a scent that triggered his protective instincts, suddenly barked, a sharp warning sound that cut through the night. The BioSync team froze, then immediately began scanning the darkness with powerful flashlights. "We've been compromised," Eleanor snapped. "Activate the disruptor now, full power." One of her assistants hesitated. "It hasn't been properly calibrated. The effects could be—" "Do it." Lily felt it immediately. A wave of dissonance that tore through her speaker's connection like static through a radio signal. The carefully maintained mental links with Guardian's Grove's wildlife fragmented into chaos. Animals fled in confused panic, their coordinated awareness shattered. Even her bond with Phoenix wavered, his eyes meeting hers with sudden confusion. "No!" she gasped, clutching her head as pain lanced through it. Joseph, too, staggered, his face contorted in agony. Through the disruption, Lily sensed something else. Mahwa, fighting against the effect, struggling to maintain contact. The bear's mental presence felt different, infused with an almost human quality of determination. "Remember the circle," came the impression. Not in words, but in powerful sensory images. Remember the center. Before anyone could stop her, Lily broke from their hiding place, Phoenix at her heels despite his confusion. She raced not toward the BioSync equipment but away from it, toward the speaker's circle miles distant. Behind her, she heard shouts of alarm. Her father calling her name, the sound of pursuit crashing through undergrowth. Her consciousness flickered between clarity and static as the disruptor's effect washed over the sanctuary in expanding waves. Still, she ran, guided by instinct and memory where her gift now failed her. Phoenix kept pace, though he whined in distress, his own heightened senses obviously affected. They reached the ancient circle as moonlight broke through clouds overhead, illuminating the standing stones in silver light. Mahua awaited them, swaying slightly as if also fighting the disruptor's influence. The bear huffed in recognition as Lily stumbled into the circle's center. "What do I do?" Lily gasped, dropping to her knees beside the central altar stone. "How do we stop it?" No answer came in words or impressions. The speaker's connection was too fractured. Instead, Mahua moved with deliberate intent to one of the standing stones, rising onto her hind legs to press her paw against a spiraling carving Lily had never noticed before. The bear's claws traced the pattern with surprising delicacy. Understanding flashed through Lily's mind. The speaker's circle wasn't just a place of communion. It was the source of the connection itself, a focal point for whatever natural phenomenon allowed interspecies communication in Guardian's Grove. And the spiral patterns Joseph had taught her represented not just symbolic communication, but a key to activating the circle's full potential. With trembling fingers, Lily traced the same spiral on the altar stone before her. As her fingertips completed the pattern, a sensation like electricity coursed up her arm. The moonlight seemed to intensify, pooling in the carved grooves of the ancient stones. Phoenix howled, not in pain, but in a tone that resonated with the stones themselves. Throughout Guardian's Grove, animals responded. Wolves joining the howl, bears roaring, birds calling, a chorus of life rising in defiance of the artificial disruption. Lily felt her speaker's connection snap back into focus with stunning clarity, stronger than it had ever been before. Through this enhanced perception, she sensed the biosync disruptor as a discordant note in the symphony of the forest's natural energy. With newfound intuition, she reached out mentally toward it, envisioning not destruction, but harmonization, adjusting its frequency rather than fighting against it. Miles away, the biosync team watched in confusion as their equipment suddenly recalibrated itself, displays flickering with unexpected data. Before they could react, the disruptor emitted a high-pitched whine and shut down, its circuits overloaded by a power surge no one could explain. When Silas, Joseph, and Nora finally reached the speaker's circle, guided by forest rangers and sanctuary security who had responded to their emergency call, they found Lily seated calmly at its center. Phoenix lay beside her, head on her lap, while Mahua sat opposite them like a sentinel. Most astonishing was the circle itself. The ancient stones seemed to glow with a soft, pulsing light that faded even as they watched, returning to ordinary stone under the moonlight. "What happened?" Nora asked, scientific curiosity overcoming her concern as she approached cautiously. Lily smiled, her eyes reflecting something ancient and new simultaneously. "The circle protected itself, or rather, showed me how to protect it. It's been doing that for centuries, I think." Joseph nodded slowly. The old stories mentioned times of awakening, when the speaker's circle would reveal more of its nature to those worthy of its trust. "Biosync?" Lily asked. Apprehended, Silas replied with satisfaction. "Their equipment has been confiscated. Eleanor Mercer's facing multiple charges, including trespassing in a federal wildlife sanctuary and attempted sabotage of a protected indigenous heritage site." In the days that followed, as autumn deepened toward winter, Guardian's Grove experienced an unexpected transformation. Animals that had previously maintained respectful distances from human research activities now approached with apparent curiosity. Species that normally avoided each other were observed in proximity without aggression. The speaker's circle, examined with new scientific instruments, revealed patterns of electromagnetic activity that defied conventional explanation. For Lily, the most profound change was internal. Her ability to communicate across species had expanded beyond simple sensory sharing into something more complex, not quite language, but a rich exchange of concepts, emotions, and intentions that transcended the limitations she'd previously encountered. It's like the difference between hearing someone speak and actually understanding what they mean, she tried to explain to her parents and the Blackwoods as they sat together before a crackling fire in the Morgan home. Before, I was translating between fundamentally different ways of experiencing the world. Now there's a middle ground where our minds can meet. Joseph leaned forward, eyes bright with excitement. The indigenous teachings suggest this is only the beginning. They speak of speakers who could not only perceive through animal consciousness but help guide it, working in partnership with wildlife to maintain balance in the ecosystem. Like coordinated fire prevention, natural reseeding after forest damage, sustainable predator-prey relationships, Nora mused, her scientific mind already cataloging possibilities. And protection against threats like biosync, Silas added grimly. They won't be the last to try to exploit or destroy what we've discovered here. Wren, who had remained thoughtful throughout the conversation, finally spoke. What does this mean for you, Lily? For your future? It was the question Lily had been asking herself since that night at the speaker's circle. At 20, she stood at a crossroads. University had been deferred while she developed her unique abilities, but conventional education seemed increasingly irrelevant to the path unfolding before her. I think, she said slowly, that Guardian's Grove needs more than just protection. It needs understanding. A bridge between the human world with its science and technology and the animal world with its ancient wisdom and different ways of knowing. She scratched Phoenix behind the ears, drawing comfort from his solid presence. I want to become that bridge in a formal way. Not just researching or documenting, but actively teaching others to listen. You want to train new speakers, Joseph realized, his expression a mixture of pride and concern. Lily nodded. The indigenous people who created the circle didn't intend it to be used by just one person in each generation. Their records suggest communities of speakers, each with different gifts and connections to different species. She looked around at her family, the parents who had supported her unconventional path, the mentors who had guided her understanding of her unique abilities. I think that's how it's supposed to be. Not one person carrying the responsibility alone, but many working together. The idea took root quickly. By the following spring, with the blessing of the indigenous tribes whose ancestors had first created the Speakers Circle, Guardian's Grove established the first Speakers Academy. Candidates were carefully selected, individuals who demonstrated unusual empathy with animals, often those who had worked successfully with wildlife rehabilitation or conservation. Under Lily's guidance, they began the slow process of awakening the dormant ability for cross-species communication that she believed existed in many humans. Progress was neither quick nor uniform. Some students developed limited perception within weeks. Others required months of patient practice to achieve even momentary connection. The scientific community remained divided, with traditionally minded researchers dismissing the entire program as elaborate self-deception, while more progressive scientists developed increasingly sophisticated methods to document and validate the neurological changes occurring in successful speakers. Through it all, Mawa remained a constant presence, not just in Lily's life, but as a kind of senior teacher for the academy. The aging bear, now approaching the end of her natural lifespan, displayed a patience with fumbling human students that defied conventional understanding of Ursine behavior. Her grown offspring had established territories throughout Guardian's Grove, creating a network of bear consciousness that formed the backbone of the sanctuary's interspecies communication web. It was during the Academy's second year, as summer heat gave way to the first crisp days of autumn, when Lily sensed a change in Mahwa's presence, a fatigue that went beyond physical limitation, a sense of completion that carried both sadness and satisfaction. The great bear began spending more time near the speaker's circle, often sitting for hours beside particular stones, as if in communion with them. "She's preparing to leave us," Lily told her family one evening, her voice steady despite the grief tightening her throat. "Not immediately, but soon." Wren reached across the table to squeeze her daughter's hand. "She's had an extraordinary life, longer than most bears in the wild. And her legacy will continue through her offspring and through the academy," Silas added gently. Lily nodded, but the prospect of losing Mahwa, the bear who had saved her as an infant, who had shaped her entire life's path, created an ache no rational understanding could soothe. That night she walked alone to the speaker's circle, guided by moonlight and memory. Phoenix accompanied her but seemed to understand her need for solitude, keeping a respectful distance as she entered the ancient ring of stones. Mahwa awaited her, massive form silver-tipped in the moonlight, amber eyes reflecting wisdom accumulated over decades. The bear huffed softly in greeting as Lily sat cross-legged before the central altar. No words passed between them. None were needed. Through their profound connection, Lily experienced Mahwa's life in flowing impressions. The bear's earliest memories of emerging from her den as a cub, the traumatic injury and healing touch of a human hand that had first awakened her unusual awareness, the decades of watching over Guardian's Grove, the extraordinary moment when a barking dog and crying infant had triggered her intervention despite every natural instinct. In return, Lily shared her own journey, the gradual awakening to her gift, the struggles to understand it, the joy of connection across the boundaries of species, and the vision of healing the ancient divide between human and animal consciousness. "It continues," came the impression from Mahwa, not in language but in certainty as solid as the stones surrounding them. "What begins here does not end." Tears streamed down Lily's face as she pressed her palm against Mahwa's massive paw, feeling the roughness of pads and the gentle pressure of claws that could tear flesh, but chose instead to touch with delicacy. "I'll miss you," she whispered. Mahwa huffed again, communicating not consolation but correction. Separation was an illusion, the bear's consciousness suggested. What they had built together existed beyond physical presence. They sat together until dawn painted the eastern sky with gold. When Lily finally rose to leave, Mahwa remained at the circle, settling into a watchful stillness that spoke of ancient purpose. 3 days later, as autumn leaves reached their peak of color, Mahwa did not respond to Lily's morning connection. With Phoenix leading the way, Lily traveled to the speaker's circle, already knowing what she would find. The great bear lay peacefully beside the central altar, her massive body still, her spirit departed. Word spread through Guardian's Grove with unusual speed, not through human communication but through the animal network itself. By midday, an extraordinary gathering had assembled at the circle. Bears, including Mahwa's offspring and descendants, formed an outer ring. Wolves, cougars, eagles, and countless smaller creatures positioned themselves according to some instinctive protocol. No aggression manifested between natural predators and prey. All were united in what could only be described as mourning. When the human residents of Guardian's Grove arrived, the Morgan and Blackwood families, academy students, researchers, and sanctuary staff, they found themselves welcomed into this unprecedented assembly. No one spoke, no one needed to. The shared grief and celebration of an extraordinary life transcended the boundaries of species. As twilight approached, Lily stepped forward to complete what she knew must be done. Following instructions Joseph had translated from ancient indigenous texts, she and the Academy's most advanced students prepared Mahwa's body according to traditions thousands of years old. The Great Bear was positioned on a platform of carefully arranged stones within the circle, facing the setting sun, surrounded by offerings from both humans and animals, honey-filled combs from wild bees, perfect pine cones carried by squirrels, flowers arranged by human hands, and a worn leather collar that had once belonged to Atlas. As darkness fell, Lily traced the spiral pattern on the altar stone, and once again the circle responded. Soft light emanated from the ancient stones, growing stronger as the stars appeared overhead. It enveloped Mahwa's body in a gentle radiance that intensified over hours until watching eyes could no longer distinguish between the light and the physical form within it. By dawn, only the stone platform remained, Mahwa's body transformed by a process no one could explain through conventional science. In its place lay a single object, a small carved stone bear, warm to the touch and faintly luminous in shadow. Lily recognized it as identical to ancient artifacts Joseph had shown her, ceremonial objects the indigenous people had called spirit tokens. Over the weeks that followed, Guardians Grove experienced yet another transformation. The Speaker's network, which many had feared might collapse without Mahwa's founding presence, instead grew stronger. Students who had struggled suddenly found themselves able to access cross-species communication with newfound clarity. Animals that had remained peripheral to human research activities now approached with apparent purpose. Most remarkably, the carved stone bear began to exhibit unusual properties. When placed on the central altar during speaker training, it amplified the circle's effects dramatically. When carried by speakers moving through the sanctuary, it facilitated connection even at distances where such communication had previously weakened or failed entirely. It's as if Mahwa's consciousness has been preserved somehow, Nora suggested during one research meeting, her scientific mind still struggling to reconcile what she observed with what she understood to be possible. Joseph nodded thoughtfully. The ancient texts speak of guardian spirits who transcend physical form to continue their protection of sacred places. Perhaps we're witnessing the literal truth behind what we assumed was metaphorical language. For Lily, now 22 and growing into her role as the Academy's principal teacher, the explanation mattered less than the reality she experienced daily. The essence of Mahwa, not her personality in human terms but her foundational consciousness, remained accessible through the speaker's connection. Not as a voice or distinct presence, but as a pattern of awareness that strengthened and guided the entire network of communication throughout Guardians Grove. On the first anniversary of Mahwa's transformation, as autumn once again painted the mountains in gold and crimson, a new development caught everyone by surprise. Phoenix, now a distinguished adult dog with the beginnings of gray around his muzzle, began bringing Lily to a remote section of Guardians Grove she had rarely visited. There, in a sheltered den beneath a rocky overhang, they found a young bear cub, orphaned, starving, and frightened. Most surprising was the cub's appearance, smaller than typical for its age, with unusual coloration that included a distinctive light patch on its shoulder, identical to Mahwa's. Through her speaker's connection, Lily sensed something else, an awareness in the cub's consciousness that felt strangely familiar. When she brought the orphaned cub to the sanctuary's Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, DNA testing confirmed what Lily already suspected. This was Mahwa's grand cub, offspring of her youngest daughter, who had apparently been killed by poachers outside the sanctuary's boundaries. The genetic markers were unmistakable, including the same unusual patterns Nora had documented years earlier. "Life continues in cycles," Joseph said simply when Lily shared the news. The old stories say that special guardians sometimes choose to return. Whether coincidence, genetics, or something more mysterious, the young bear, whom Lily named Coda, from an indigenous word for friend, displayed remarkable intelligence from the beginning of his rehabilitation. He adapted quickly to human presence, formed a respectful relationship with Phoenix despite natural species boundaries, and responded to speaker communication with unusual clarity for his age. As Coda grew stronger under the sanctuary's care, it became apparent that Guardians Grove's story was entering a new chapter. The Speakers Academy had established its first satellite campus near another ancient stone circle discovered in mountains 300 miles distant. Research papers documenting verifiable interspecies communication had begun to gain traction in mainstream scientific publications. Environmental protection agencies worldwide had started sending representatives to learn Guardians Grove's unique approaches to ecosystem management through cooperation rather than control. And Lily Morgan, once a crying infant saved by an unlikely alliance between a barking German shepherd and a compassionate bear, now stood at the center of a growing movement to heal humanity's ancient disconnection from the natural world. Not through mysticism alone, nor through pure science, but through the integration of both. Empirical observation illuminated by indigenous wisdom, technological advancement guided by ecological awareness. On the evening of her 23rd birthday, as firelight played across the faces of her gathered family and friends, Lily held the carved stone bear that contained some essence of Mahwa's spirit. Phoenix dozed at her feet while Coda, now a gangly adolescent bear, watched attentively from a respectful distance, permitted to attend this human gathering as part of his unique upbringing. "When I was little," she said, her voice carrying in the night stillness, "I used to think the miracle was that a bear and a dog saved me. Later, I thought the miracle was that I could communicate with them." She smiled, running her fingers over the smooth stone carving that felt warm despite the cool evening air. "Now, I understand that the real miracle is much simpler and much more profound. We are not separate from them. We never were." Around the circle, heads nodded in understanding. Joseph's weathered face reflected the firelight as he added softly, "The indigenous people who first created the Speaker's Circle had a saying, 'The animal speaks to those who listen, and the human speaks for those who cannot be heard.'" Lily completed the phrase, words she had adopted as the Academy's motto. As if in affirmation, a chorus of howls rose from the distant forest, the wolves of Guardians Grove. Their voices joined in harmony that seemed to bridge the divide between wilderness and civilization. Phoenix lifted his head, adding his own voice to the song. Even Coda contributed, his young bear voice a rumbling counterpoint. And somewhere in the shared consciousness that flowed through every living being in Guardians Grove, Lily sensed Mahwa's enduring presence, not gone, but transformed, not lost, but expanded. The boundaries of self dissolved into something greater than any single life could contain. The German shepherd had barked, the infant had cried, the bear had come, and from that unlikely beginning had grown a new understanding that would perhaps help to heal the ancient wound between humanity and the natural world, of which it had always been an inseparable part. In Guardians Grove, beneath stars that had witnessed the entire journey of life on Earth, that healing continued. One bark, one cry, one compassionate choice at a time.